same, make sure he doesn't go to lunch with her, get him away somewhere. He talks about getting involved in the church too much, and he says to his junior devils, don't worry about that. Let him get involved in church meetings and church jumble sales and church coffee mornings and church bring and buys. That's all right. In a few months, it'll all turn to ashes in his mouth. It'll all be far too boring for him. Let him get on with that. But go out for coffee with that woman, a true believer, and listen to her one-to-one. Don't let him do that.
Faith at the Fringe, a Sanctuary First podcast series. Uncovering God in the creative arts. At the biggest international arts festival in the world, Sanctuary First stops to ask, where does faith and art meet?
And welcome to Faith at the Fringe, a Sanctuary First podcast series that seeks to engage with artists and musicians and creatives who are at the Edinburgh Fringe Festival. And we have with us today in our beautiful new studio, podcast studio, centred, believe it or not, in the oldest Christian heritage site in Edinburgh, St Cuthbert's Church. And we're delighted that we have with us today David Robinson. We interviewed David last year, but this year David is come with another play entitled Screwtape Letters. And we're looking forward to having a discussion with you, David, about the whole play.
Very much nice to be here, and a lovely setting, if I may say so. Thank you.
Yeah, it's really, really good. We're encouraged by our ethos.
St Cuthbert's, you don't get to see this room. This room is hidden away. So have a good look at these wonderful windows while you've got a chance.
But like so many churches in the city, they are a venue and having some events here as well, which is great.
Absolutely.
So David, you are the director of the Searchlight Theatre Company, and you have a number of plays going on in the Fringe Festival this year. But we're particularly wanting to talk to you on this podcast about your involvement with C.S. Lewis.
Yeah.
And the question I suppose we're wanting to ask is, why would you pick C.S. Lewis' Screwtape Letters?
Well, I think there's a few reasons. One is a commercial one, I guess. He is hugely popular. Screwtape Letters is an international bestseller. So if I'm thinking box office, I think for our kind of audience, a Christian audience, but also fringe goers as well. Most people walk up and down Princes Street may well have heard of a book by C.S. Lewis. May not be Screwtape, but they would know the name and probably the Narnia series. So my relationship with Screwtape Letters goes back quite a long way. Before I set up Searchlight, I was in Salt Mine Theatre Company, another touring Christian theatre company. And way back in 1994, when I was, considerably younger, obviously, we were looking for a full-length play. I took over the leadership of the company, and I said to the board, the directors, I'd love to do full-length productions and go into churches and theatres and really unpack over a couple of hours. Up until then, we've been doing sort of 5-minute sketches and supporting our evangelists, and thought maybe it's the time to go a bit longer. And so we were looking for something that would attract. And that's when we plumped for C.S. Lewis. And a friend of ours called Nigel Ford, who works for Riding Lights Theatre Company as well, another Christian touring theatre company, he was a real C.S. Lewis aficionado, and he'd been studying at Oxford, where Lewis taught, obviously. So he set it in that scholastic kind of setting. So, reason number one was I thought it was a good seller. Number two is I really liked the book. And number three, I thought it said something really, really important about the spiritual battles and warfares that we are in, that are often maybe diverted around sometimes and not dug in too deeply. And if anybody wants to dig into anything deeply, it's the apologetic and the theologian and lecturer that C.S. Lewis was, and he certainly does. From the other side round, really, you know, from the devil's perspective, from the devil's point of view. He is a senior devil, and he's the character I play, a lecturer in a devil's college, and he uses his junior devils, his protégés, Wormwood and Slubgob, to go into the human world and tempt them away from faith, tempt them away from God. I think often we think about God, look at things from God's perspective. This is looking at it from the other way around. But primarily it's a story of darkness and light and good and evil and what triumphs in the end.
It's interesting, I read somewhere when C.S. Lewis was asked, you know, how did you manage to get into the mind of a devil like that? And C.S. Lewis says it wasn't too difficult because we're human beings.
Yeah.
But he said, if you'd asked me why it was more difficult to perhaps write a letter from God to his Christian patients, you might say, that might be more difficult because he couldn't go into the mind of God.
Yeah.
So I thought that was quite interesting.
Yeah, I think he said, how easy did you find it to write the letters from the devil? And he said, well, I think I'm a bit closer to the devil on a daily basis than I am to God at some times. So, you know, I think he found it easier to do some of it than he thought. But then in one of his biographies, he states that actually at times it became the most difficult and the one he wrestled with the most, waking up thinking, I don't quite know what to write next in this book. But was a huge success. And certainly when I was growing up, in the church and my sort of early years in the faith, Screwtape was on pretty much every bookshelf I went to when I stayed with folk or in church bookshelves. And still today, we can still guarantee it's going to bring people in. This week at the Fringe, we've got good numbers coming. For Fringe anyway. It's in double figures, which is good for the Fringe. But, you know, they're up to 50, 60 people already coming, which for the Edinburgh Fringe is pretty good going. So it's still attracting. And I think what I like about it is it attracts Fringe goers as well as church goers. And obviously some of those are both the same, but some aren't. And some will be attracted by his name and his back catalogue of writing. And that's exciting to see them coming through the doors.
Yeah, so as an actor, he's seeking to take on the role of Screwtape, because you're Screwtape.
Yeah.
And do you, first of all, can I ask you, do you believe in the devil? Do you think do you believe in the devil? And then, if that's the case, maybe the second question is, how does that affect you? Do you find yourself being tempted more because you're seeking to uncover the machinations of the devil in the world today?
Well, answer number one, yes, I do believe in the devil, and I think very much there is opposites. There's goodness, and there's badness, and there's light, and there's dark, I feel I want to be attracted to the light as much as I possibly can, and sometimes we do that by showing up how difficult and how wrong the dark side is. It's a great character to play, in saying that, and often the baddies are, you know, people run to play the pantomime baddie rather than the goody two-shoes, as it were. It's often a much, much, much deeper and more enjoyable character to get under. So, yeah, he plays this senior devil, and he plays a university don with his sort of gown on throughout. And I make a point of taking that gown off very purposefully at the end of the performance and hanging it up and saying that's Screwtape done. I don't want to take that kind of character with me. Not that I've got the wonderful godly thoughts for the rest of the day necessarily, but I know the strength of something like Screwtape, and I don't want that to get into me. And it's, you know, I've been acting since I was in my early 20s. Pretending to be other people is what I do, and I'm more comfortable doing that than probably being myself. So I need to be very sure it is a character. I am playing someone else. I am pretending. But saying that, obviously, I need to be convincing as well. And people who come to see it, I really, really want to believe that they think that Screwtape, a senior devil, does exist, and he does send his protégés down to earth and say, that guy there, he's singing in church, that guy there, he's meeting now a woman who is a true believer. This could be very dangerous. You need to pull him away from that woman. She believes in God. She really prays earnestly every day. She's going to start to convince him of the same. Make sure he doesn't go to lunch with her. Get him away somewhere. And all that clever stuff of Lewis, and he talks about getting involved in the church too much, and he says to his junior devils, don't worry about that. Let him get involved in church meetings and church jumble sales and church coffee mornings and church bring and buys. That's all right. In a few months, it'll all turn to ashes in his mouth. It'll all be far too boring for him. Let him get on with that. But go out for coffee with that woman, a true believer, and listen to her one-to-one. Don't let him do that. And that's the kind of real stuff that was relevant then and relevant now. And I'm wanting people to believe that. But at the end of the day, spoiler alert, he gets his comeuppance and the lightness wins. So for me, it's key that they follow the journey and believe in Screwtape. They must believe in Screwtape in order to recognize his downfall. And even with the demise of his subject, who he is chasing and chasing and chasing. Of course, at the end of the day, the subject is in God's hands. So he does lose him in the end. And that follows the demise then of Screwtape. He can't do any more. He can't do any more once he's seen an angel. The subject has seen an angel face to face. And Screwtape, you were asking about belief in demons. And Screwtape says an angel to him is just a gleaming light, a burning bright. I can't look at that light. It's too much for me as Screwtape. And yet this subject now is seeing that angel face to face and being welcomed into heaven. So the victory is his.
Yeah, it's interesting too. Do you think, is Screwtape then some way a fallen angel that can't look back at what he once had and doesn't want to go back to that situation?
I think he probably is, and he's pretty bitter towards that past, and he's fallen too far, and he's got too deep into the world that he's in, he does the will of the dark side of the devil, and too far away from God now. That's too bright, too hurtful to even look at. So I think he is a fallen angel, and fallen a pretty mighty way.
So here's another question on that. Not a devil, but someone who perhaps is being tempted, is a patient. But is it possible for a patient to become so cynical in the same way as Screwtape becomes cynical? So what I'm saying is it possible for a Christian to become cynical and only see the dark side of things and be critical of church life and critical of everything around it and just not be part of it anymore? Oh,
yes. Well, I've met some cynical Christians in my time. I don't know about you, Albert, but they're around. Sometimes I think they might sometimes take temporary little vacations to different places, but I think it's certainly possible. I mean, surely Lewis's book was about that temptation, about dragging people away, making them cynical, making them think, what on earth are you believing in? Come on, get real. None of this is going to help you. And I think Lewis was real about the temptations that we come across. He talked about in Screwtape Letters in considerable depth. The subject got to know a young lady. The woman asked her to come in and live with them because his house was bombed in the war. Screwtape then sent his junior devils down, tempt them to do things they shouldn't do as a couple who aren't married. And but he didn't fall for it, or she was too strong in her views for it. But I think Lewis knew, and maybe he suffered it himself, I don't know, that we are tempted away, that we are prone to being cynical, negative, questioning if things don't go our way. Well, does God exist? Because I really wanted this to happen, but it's not. And you become maybe negative, maybe cynical, maybe too questioning, maybe just wanting the answers that you really want. And then God's maybe got a different plan for you in the end. I think, in short, yes, I think, of course, I can think of times when I've been cynical and doubtful. Definitely, yeah. And the devil will play on that.
And that can become a sense of disappointment and hurt that I think is maybe very relevant as you come and talk about this in Scotland today, when there is so many of our churches are feeling they're being closed down. They're feeling as though what they once knew as church and church life is disappearing. And there can be a sense of real disappointment around. And perhaps this play allows us to start to engage with that. And people might start to think, how do we get out of that? How do we find redemption? How do we stop being cynical?
Yeah. And I think there's hope in the Screwtape letters. I wasn't sure of it when I first read it. I thought, really? But yeah, I think it's quite a long narrative, and it's not the easiest book in the world to read, but the play obviously is much easier, and I strongly recommend it. But the arc, I think, ends in a place of hope. It's despair and darkness for Screwtape, but it's extreme light and hope for the believer, because he's out of Screwtape's grips, and I think, I don't know about the church up here in Scotland, I think it's pretty general in the UK. I think that story of hope just needs to come a bit stronger and underlined, and actually that great promise of heaven and meeting these angels face to face is a wonderful story that I think is a bit lacking. And I think if the hope story was a bit stronger, then maybe that encouragement to come to some of these churches would improve. I don't know, but we have a story of hope to tell, and I think one of the essences, and there's a few of those in Screwtape letters, is in the end, for the believer, victory and hope and eternal life. I mean, what a message.
Mm-hmm. So tied in with that then is the other side, when we're thinking about Screwtape, when we're thinking about cynicism, learning how we can walk in such a way that we are living in a world where the scripture says we wrestle not against flesh and blood, but against the powers of darkness and this evil world. But also that there is a strength that can come from seeing that we are not just flesh and blood, or that we're not just materialistic people, but we're spiritual people. So if we focus too much on the evil bit, then we deny the reality of the power that can be in us as Christians. So I think what I'm now trying to get a wee discussion around the idea of how do we grow the spiritual life so that we become strong in the face of temptation, in the face of Wormwood.
Yeah. Well, I'm hoping you've got an answer for that, but my answer would be, I think my spiritual growth, it's a bit like coming back to Screwtape, and why was he so concerned about the subject getting close to a true believer, somebody who really trusted God on a daily basis and prayed regularly, believed in miracles, sought God's guidance on every decision she made. Screwtape was desperate for this subject not to go anywhere near her. I think I'm so grateful to to the people I've walked my Christian life with, I guess, and I've learnt so much from them about getting closer and deeper spiritually. Yes, of course, I have my own one-to-one personal relationship with God, but I think I've learnt more just from following in the footsteps or alongside other people in my life. And I don't know about you, but I can sit down with a coffee, and if somebody tells me about an answer to prayer, it just builds my faith so much. So did I tell you I was praying for this situation, and then I heard today that X, Y, Z is going to happen, and that just builds me up so much. And the other day we were premiering our other show about Titanic, and we put a lot of prayer into that. It still sinks, but it's we just had a lot of work to do, and then the first night went really well. And I know that's not a huge thing, but we were still grateful that it went well, and we felt God's presence on stage, as we've done many times. We're a Christian theatre company for a reason, and we commit our writing and our rehearsing and our performance and our audience to God each day, every time we're performing. And we want it to be something special. So, yeah, coming back to your, the disappointment of the decreasing church, that is sad, because I think we can do so much together, and I think we're so much stronger together. The word company at the end of Searchlight Theatre is no accident. I think I wouldn't want to work as a solo performer. I gain such a lot from being in a company, and when I go home at the end of the Fringe, I gain a lot from going to my home church and finding out what they've been up to for the summer. And I'm sure they will have encouraging stories of their walk with God as well that'll encourage me, and I'll be able to tell them about my time at the Fringe, of coming here to this beautiful place and doing a podcast and then doing a show every day, and there'll be stories to tell. So, I've been a storyteller through theatre all my life, and I would just value that and encourage others. Tell your stories of faith. Don't keep them to yourselves, and you'll be amazed. You'll be amazed what encouragement that would be to your fellow travellers.
Yeah, I mean, I was interested, that sometimes we can come out with pat, answers to these kind of questions, how do we grow as Christians? And there are things that I think are important, like Bible reading and learning to pray in community and learning to pray with expectation. But also this whole idea you're talking about is listening to one another and encouraging one another in our faith. I think we don't do enough of that. And we need to find that becomes our security and our strength as we start encouraging one another to look to Jesus rather than to look at the negative things in our lives. Yeah,
and you wonder why Screwtape gets twitchy whenever the subject is with anyone else. It's because of that very reason. He's tempting his protégés, Wormwood and Slubgob, to get him away on his own. The end of Act 1, the subject is alone in his house. This is before it's bombed, because it's set during the war. And he decides he wants to pray. And it's quite a well-known chapter and a scene now in the play where Screwtape sends a devil down, and the devil, little junior devil, does everything in his power to stop him praying. Did you turn the heating off? Yeah. Did you put the dog out? Yeah, to put the dog out. Do you want to read a book before you go? Yeah, I've read a book. Yeah, what about something to eat? And all these kind of things are being whispered into his ear, and to a certain extent, the devil's quite successful. Why? Because the subject is on his own, and that is when I think the devil can be at his most dangerous in his tempting. And then he starts eventually to pray, and he prays earnestly to God and with a sense of real believability. He really thinks he's talking to God, as he is. And when he does that, the junior devil cannot get near him because he's in conversation with his God. Until then, he's thinking, yeah, wait a minute. Yeah, actually, I was reading that book last night. I might just read. Yeah, as we all do. It's not always the best time to get into deep prayer, and the junior devil knew that. But his converse with God shooed him away.
We would love to hear from the community who are listening to this podcast. We'd love to get your impression of what's been said today. There may be things that you're not sure about. You may not be sure whether you believe in the devil, but then you've got other questions to ask yourself. So if I don't believe in the devil, do I believe in God? And how do I make out and how do I understand temptation and where that's coming from? So it'd be good to just hear some of your thoughts as we draw a conclusion to this particular podcast, just to think about how you're thinking about things and how you want to respond to what you've been hearing from David. But David, there's some more things I want to just ask you. If someone wants to go along to the performance, where will they find it?
Well, for the duration of the Edinburgh Fringe, it's at a venue called Charlotte Chapel, not too far from where we're sitting now in Shandwick Place. And there are matinee performances and there are evening performances. So you can go to the edfringe.com website and I'll give you all the details, or indeed the Charlotte Chapel website. Again, all the details are on there. Like I say, it's in tandem with our production about Titanic, The Last Hero. So some days it's Titanic, some days it's Screwtape. So it'd be best just to check the website and go along. And there's coffee served afterwards. So I'd be very delighted to meet anyone who comes.
Yeah, it'd be great. And if you do go, please tell them you heard it on the podcast. And because we want people to be part of the podcast.
Yeah.
And we want people to feel part of this engagement with our spiritual lives, that we've been made aware. Sanctuary First is making us aware. Faith at the Fringe can be a dangerous place to be because you're going to encounter maybe temptations, because especially if you're going to get interested in faith, it seems to me as though that's what you're saying. Screwtape's not happy about that.
No, that's true enough. But there's a fair amount of darkness around at the Fringe, so it's a delight that you're doing this kind of thing, and that there are one or two Christian theatre companies up here as well, bringing some light. And at the end of the day, remember that in Screwtape Letters, he doesn't get the victory. The old Professor Screwtape, in the end, fails because the light is too strong for him.
Yeah, and so that's an encouragement for us all today to think that the light is too strong. The darkness will never be able to put out the light. So if you're enjoying our podcast, can we encourage you to get friends and family to look into the podcast? You can find the podcasts on some of the platforms like on Spotify or on iTunes. You can also find our podcasts on our app at Sanctuary First, or you can go onto the Sanctuary First website, www.sanctuaryfirst.org.uk, or you can find them on Facebook as well. So we really do hope that you will participate and join with us in this podcast series and see what we can learn together. And maybe if you start listening to them all, see if you can see, is there a theme being woven through them? I think there is, maybe. Hannah, you're not sure about that?
Well, we've only done 2, Albert, so, it's a very short thread at the moment, but maybe maybe as we go on, it'll get longer.
There was a theme, I think, from the last one, the mystery plays. Mystery plays were often about good and evil, about the challenge of good and evil. Today, we're thinking about good and evil, and, there's a struggle between that and making sense of all that in our world. So, listen, from this beautiful heritage site, St. Cuthbert's and the Sanctuary First podcast studio, a thank you to you, David Robinson, for being with us today, and to Hannah for sitting in and being part of our podcast. So until next time, God bless.